Welcome back to Dr. Taz Presents The Cost of Telling What You Survived. There is a moment every writer reaches before they share their story publicly. It is the moment where the writing is done, but the consequences have not yet begun. This is where wisdom matters, because how you release your story is just as important as what you write. Felicia, today we're talking about preparation, not for the page, but for what happens after the page. Before involving anyone else, what does it look like for a writer to get clear on their intention?
What does it look like for a writer to get clear on their intention? There are a lot, well, not a lot, but there are a few steps or processes, I would say, that the writer should go through before they get ready to release that. And I was thinking about this, and I know we mentioned a few things in our first two or three episodes that we discussed. But one of the things I did not mention, and I think this is a good place for it, is part of that preparation. What it looks like is before you release your story and do so with wisdom, it is important to consider the legal risk and protections also when it comes to releasing your story, because this is really critical, is a critical part of your publishing, because you take a risk, of defamation, and you may not have thought about that. Is there someone out there that could claim or say in some type of way you damaged their reputation? And so that takes us back to the previous discussion of you may not want to be including these specific identifiers in your story. So think about the legal risk and protections. Think about are those individuals identifiable in this book? Have I changed the names in there? Do I need maybe to include types of a disclaimer, maybe because you're dealing with true events that have occurred? Do you need some type of written consent when it comes to going public and telling your story? For, let's say, if the story involved some type of abuse, if it's somebody in a leadership role, maybe in your church or your community or organization, is that something in your book that is extremely identifiable, and again may be what they consider defaming them in some way? That can be a very sensitive area for you as a writer when you're telling your story. So I would say the first thing would be your legal risk of protection. Think about that. Also be responsible. We mentioned that one before, because you're the one that's going to control how your story is being told. Okay, so you have to be sure that you can tell a balanced story and put it out without all of that pain or trauma going out with it. You have to ask yourself, am I assigning this blame to someone and showing that in this book? Or am I more so offering a context to what occurred and including the understanding of what occurred to me or in my life? I don't want to just shame, blame, or put somebody out there and point fingers. What context am I presenting this in?
I think that's so very important, Felicia, because you're right. There is a legal risk that needs to be explored really before you put the pen to the paper, because that will really help shape the book. We
Absolutely.
talked about you having the emotional support, but that legal support, because sometimes as writing coaches and as therapists and coaches, mental health coaches, behavior coaches, we can try to lead a person a certain way, but sometimes they have to hear it from the horse's mouth. And when the legal team says this is going to put you at risk if you say XYZ, it's good if they hear that from them. Then we in our roles can help them to reshape and refine how their work product actually looks, and then provide the supports along the way,
Yes.
emotionally, spiritually, etc., that's supporting that person. But you're right, that is so important. And I think also once you do that up front, it helps to diminish this inclination, hopefully, for the shame blaming, and helps to really pinpoint the context that you're writing from, which goes back to, we're not writing, as you've said over and over again, to wound the reader. This is a tool. So just, I think, going with making sure that you've consulted the legal person initially in the process may save the writer a lot of angst as they go through the
Absolutely.
process. So given all of that, why is it important then to anchor their story in purpose and not just emotion? Because it is an emotional thing that we're talking about. So why is it important that they're anchored in the purpose for the writing and not their emotions?
Well, it's important, first of all, because when they write this story, they want to, I believe, show the world initially that they have gone through this or healed through this. And so, in doing that, they want to also show transformation when it comes to writing their story and sharing it. They want to be able to show, am I creating this story for me and for others? Again, to be a tool, is this just for me? And in them doing that, the importance comes in of them also putting this story out to show their intention. Okay. So I want to kind of just touch on that a little bit with their intention. Um, it's important that they write down maybe one or two sentences, or what I call intention statements, when they're putting their story out. Write it down and say to yourself, so I'm sharing this story to what? Why? They need to give a voice to their truth, the truth that people are afraid to say out loud. It's important that they state that intention also, to understand that they are creating a space for healing, a space for them to reflect and to be honest, to have honest conversation, as well as giving that same thing to the reader.
Yes.
Also, they want to, when it comes to those sentences or intention statements, they also say to themselves or write out, my intention is to what? It sounds very similar to, I'm sharing this story. Why? But my intention is to what? Example, use this story as a mirror. So that readers can see themselves, they can confront what hurts them, they can choose what heals. One example I would give with that is, for example, with my safe space events and my mental health platforms. If that were me and I'm sitting down writing this story out, or I'm writing a stage production, I would say my intention in this and what I'm writing is to create psychologically a safe space where youth and teens and adults can explore difficult emotions without judgment. Is be clear on what your intention is.
You know, Felicia, I think, I was reminded, I'm just an old school counselor at heart, and I was reminded of the I am statements. And I think I have that in my book, Stronger, How Overcoming Life's Adversity Can Push in Your Purpose. But I was reminded of when I was in my graduate program, and we were talking about sentence stems. And, I am this. And like you use the intention statement, my intention is this. And, I thought you were going to say it's an easy thing, but you didn't say that, because it's not. Because
No.
I am what? I'm not the victim. My intention is what? That requires reflection. I think I'm the queen of reflection. I think when
Yeah.
people hear the word reflection, they think Taz, because I'm always reflecting.
Yes.
And I say all that, guys, to give you a little humor, because of course our subject matter is sort of heavy. But to even get through my intention is so intertwined with what you're doing, and it's not an easy process. I sometimes think about some of my students when they're doing work, and I tell them, you have to think about the process. It's the thinking about the thinking, metacognition, because it's not a one and done. And once you
Yeah.
can define what your intentions are, that's going to guide the work.
Because to define your intention when it comes to writing means that you have come to the point of clarity. And clarity is not always an easy place to get to for people. So that intention statement that says, okay, I'm clarifying, I'm clear on my why it is that I'm creating this, why I'm writing this. I'm clear on what impact it's going to have on someone. I'm clear on who it's for. Your intention statement says all that. And I want to also add, sometimes people may not realize that your intention statement, when it comes to writing or your body of work or the reasons why you're doing something, that intention statement, it can be creative, but it can also be transformational. And there's a difference in that when it comes to your intention. Those are two different things.
Well, I just want to, Felicia, let the audience know that this episode of The Cost of Telling What You Survived is brought to them by DQ Consulting, LLC, empowering individuals and businesses to grow with clarity and confidence. Now, Felicia, you just said that those are two different things. So when it comes to family and others involved, how do you prepare people through conversation without seeking permission? How do you prepare them? Because that's a difficult thing.
Well, I would say when it comes to your family, you're not so, again, as you say, I don't necessarily have to have your permission to tell my truth, but I will give you the courtesy and consideration of having an intentional conversation with you. This is not a PSA, but this is a one-on-one sit down, intentional conversation with you so that my book, you don't hear about my book for the first time or hear about my truths from someone else, because sometimes that doesn't go over well. Some family members, it may be good and they just feel all sympathetic for you and what you went through, but that's not always going to be the case. So you want to have an intentional conversation with them, and that's not to get their permission. It's just offering them awareness and being mature about it. It's a sign of maturity, I say, to be able to offer that that intentional conversation with them. Also, in doing that, you have to be responsible enough to think about who's going to be impacted by that. You want to choose how you approach that with your family. You want to set a calm environment or setting to talk about that. Don't be all wrapped up in your emotions, because it won't go well if you do that. So what I would recommend to authors is, when you're getting ready to have that intentional conversation with your family, think about, how you want to say it. Maybe you want to frame it in a manner that says, hey, I want to share something with you because I love and respect you. And so out of that love and respect, I want to tell you, that I'm about to release this book and it's going to be about this or that. Or, hey, I'm working on telling my story, my truth. And parts of it include some personal, private experiences, but they're my experiences, or my intention is not to harm you in any way because I love you, but I want to be honest about what I lived through. And again, like we said before, even with that honesty, I'm going to be considerate. I'm going to use discernment and wisdom when I put this out. So that will allow them to try and process clearly, outside of the emotions, what it is that you've done and why. And what your intentions are, even if they don't agree with you. Okay.
Well, Felicia, I
That
think, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say that right there is a good way to set things up to talk to them, and it allows you all to set, hopefully emotional expectations, um, and not necessarily the outcome of those expectations, because you can't control that, but it can give you a peaceful setting to step into, because you can't control how people are going to respond, but you can prepare them.
And I like that, Felicia, because basically what you've done is you've given us the setup for how the writer can set the expectation for the response without needing whomever they're sharing this information with. Not a PSA. I love the way you said that, in a PSA.
Right.
I'm not looking for you to agree, but who you're going to share this information with. You've laid it
Right.
out very clearly. And
Yeah.
and the thing, guys, that I would say to you, if people can't even agree to that, then you know what you're dealing with.
Again, you can't control the outcome of the expectation, but you can set the expectation out there. You put it out there saying, well, I'm hoping they understand. I'm hoping maybe somebody might apologize for something, and I'm hoping that they'll be supportive when I tell my story. But a lot of times the outcome is going to be they're going to deny that ever happened. It's not true. They're going to be angry. They may even distance themselves from you because of that. So you have to prepare for that. And in preparing for that, I will add this: create you a response readiness plan. Okay?
Mhm. Yeah.
Create you a response readiness plan even before you go and have that intentional conversation. If they deny anything occurred or they don't believe what you said, you just say, hey, I understand that you see it differently, but this is my experience.
Mhm.
If they're angry with you, hey, I'm not trying to argue, wasn't trying to upset you. Again, I'm just sharing my truth. If
Mhm.
they distance themselves from you, I'm going to respect that you feel you need to do that. And I'm not going to try to change your mind and get you to validate anything for me, because, again, this is my truth. That can be a really good readiness plan for you, because you may face those things. Everybody's not going to be understanding or apologetic or supportive of you and what you say is your truth, because they're going to say, well, that's not mine, and that's not how I saw it, and I don't believe it. And how could you? So, are you as an author emotionally prepared to release this story, even if it causes your relationships to change or to shift? Because you have got to understand that telling these truths, telling your truth, is going to open up some doors and some rooms for some other people. But when it opens up those doors, you need to be prepared to have a plan to walk through those doors. They're going to open up some stuff. How are you going to walk through that? What's going to be on each side? It's like the Red Sea. The water going to be on the left and the right. Standing up, you got to walk through it. Are you prepared? It looks scary. You might not want to do it, but prepare yourself to
Okay,
walk
me
through
too.
that Red Sea. That's what I can tell you. Release your story without tying your healing to those individuals' response. Hopefully, everybody understands that. Release your story without tying that to their response.
Yeah, Felicia, I've
I
been
know that
trying.
was a lot, but it
Okay.
just kind of all packaged together.
And you did a good job packaging it, because basically we've gone from setting the expectation for when you're going to have this conversation with your family, and when you're setting the expectation, it's not a blame session, it's not a PSA. You're letting them know what you're going to do and why you're going to do it if you choose, and then already having a response readiness plan so that you're able to respond to them, because it may be five people. One person may say, well, I'm so glad you're ready to do it, and then everybody else may
Yeah,
go ballistic. It get out of hand. It can go to the left real
exactly.
quick. So you need to be prepared to respond to each person based upon your knowledge of that person. You can always
Right,
have a positive response, but you know your people. You know how you
right,
do your
right,
people. So,
right.
so if you ain't prepared, this might not be the time for you to start writing. I'm sorry, Todd.
Absolutely.
As Angelia said, they said she killed dreams. I may have to take her role, because if you're not prepared for that,
Mm-hmm.
you already haven't started putting your supports in place. You haven't
Right.
checked for your legal risk. You don't have your writing coach in place. You don't have your support system as you're working through this process.
Right.
So, I mean, you did a really good job, Felicia. And then it made me think about, how do you then get the writers to move from, and we keep saying this, and somebody gonna say they done say it this one time, might be done say it about 3-4 times, probably gonna say it every time.
But have you gotten it?
Come on
when
here
you
now.
say it?
Oh, girl, I almost said something McGlory would say, but I had to catch that word there. Somebody that know McGlory, they're going to say, oh, she about to say McGlory word. McGlory is my mama. How do you help? How do you get the writer to the place where they are not writing out of pain to writing with ownership? And let me say this, I had a conversation, I think it's with Dr. Velma, in an upcoming series that Dr. Taz is presenting on reclaiming your voice. Now, ownership, I'm saying ownership, there I'm talking about authorship, but we're still talking voice. Because voice, as I say, is tied to your identity, and people gonna eventually get it, because I'm gonna say it all the time. Eventually, they're gonna get what I'm saying. When you lose your voice, you lose your identity. When you outsource your voice on the job or wherever, it could be in a relationship, you are not really showing up. The representation is showing up. So now we're talking about writing with ownership, not to wound nobody now, not to wound the reader with all your trauma, all this stuff going on, not that type of wounding, and then not to take your pen. What they said, the pen is mightier than the sword, and let your pen be that sword and just strike these people. No. You can still have ownership and tell the truth without doing all of that. So how do you help a writer to move from writing out of pain to writing with ownership?
Well, they have to begin with choosing what I call their narrative lens. From what narrative are you going to tell this? Is it going to be from the narrative of ownership, or is it going to be accusations? And so what I mean by that is the perspective from which the author is going to write, because that is going to greatly determine the impact of their story. The perspective from which they write determines the impact of their story. For example, there's a difference between you saying to somebody, this is what they did to me. We kind of touched on this before. This is what they did to me, versus this is what I experienced and how it shaped me, my mindset and my emotions, my reactions. This is what I experienced. Also, instead of being accusatory of it, you could say things such as, I experienced. Again, that's you taking ownership. That's you. I felt, a certain way, or I learned. And because that way, again, it is showing that here I'm handing you this tool, this help. I'm not necessarily pointing the finger at anybody, but I'm sharing with you how I came through, how I got through. This is just focusing mainly on me. Okay. So you want to make sure you're, again, not writing from some unresolved emotion that you have, because if you are, it's going to be difficult to speak and write in terms of ownership or from that perspective. And so if you need to, before you open your mouth or release that out in the book form, again, pause and process, discern, use wisdom, think about it before you finalize that book to send it out. You want to tell your truth in a way that is impactful, but is also powerful for your reader, but not destructive. Okay. Then I would also suggest to them that, again, we talked about it yesterday, build that support system before they release that book. You're going to put this information out for the whole world to see, and it's going to be public. But you don't want to go public with your truth, and inside you probably are still dealing with pain and unforgiveness and trauma, because trust and believe it is not going to remain private. It is going to bleed out onto other people. Okay. And so my final thing with that would be to maybe identify you 2 or 3 people. We talked about it before, but it still applies. Identify 2 or 3 people that you can trust and talk to prior to that, because even that is taking ownership. That's taking ownership of your emotions, your mindset, mental, physical, spiritual, and emotionally. And get you a therapist, get you a coach, talk to a mentor, get you a trusted friend. Hey, I'm releasing something personal and I need your support. Or can you read what I've written so far and let me know, where do you think that's coming from? Is that coming from a place of ownership? Is that coming from a place of anger, or pointing my finger? What do you think? And I would also add finally to that, Teresa, would be, I would encourage them to plan what I call an emotional aftercare, or have an emotional aftercare plan. Once you've done that, even once you hit send, because for me personally, just hitting send, when I hit that on my laptop, I was like, oh my gosh, I actually sent that manuscript off. It's gone to the publisher. Oh my God, the process has begun. For me, that was where the process began. I didn't even see the writing as a process, but it is. But for me, hitting that submit button, it's out of my control. Now it's gone. So now what? What is my emotional aftercare plan? What are you going to do the week that the book releases, the day before it releases? How are you going to take care of yourself? Because at that point, your heart is beating fast. You may be a little nervous. You're thinking about all these things, all these other people, and hopefully things you thought about before you wrote it and sent it.
Yep.
How are you going to handle the feedback? How are you going to handle the silence, the distance, if that is what occurs? Okay. You got to think about that. You got to hold yourself together emotionally, mentally, spiritually, even if others don't, and even if they walk away. So what is going to be your emotional aftercare plan when you hit send, and when that book gets to the point it is about to be released out to the entire world? Look out for you, boo. That's that's as plain as I can say it. Look out for you.
Well, before we continue this conversation, Felicia, let me just remind the audience that this episode is sponsored by DQ Consultant LLC, helping you move your vision forward with strategy, structure, and success. And you couldn't have said it any clearer. Look out for you, boo. My phrase is take care of you, but the emotional aftercare plan, because there is a lot of angst as we go through the process. But as you said, once you hit submit, it's out of your control. And then once the book has been released, it's certainly out of your control, because you don't know how it's going to be received by any segment of the population. And I said segment of the population because I'm equating family as a segment of the population too.
Yes.
So we don't know how it's going to be received. And then, the community and the this and the that. But why then, that gets me to this place. Why is it dangerous for an audience to become the writer's only source of validation?
Because when you take on the validation of the audience, to me, it is a bit like closing the door on your own self. I thought you said you wanted to tell your truth. I thought you said that you wanted to be a help to someone else. So if you decide to grab a hold to and hold on to validity from the audience, then you're saying what you think and feel is more important. And your reaction is more important than what I initially said when I said I experienced, I felt, I learned. I'm trying to be a help to someone. I wrote this to be a tool to someone. All of a sudden, it's no longer about you. It is about them. And they did not go through that experience with you. They did not live that truth with you. And even though some of them may have some knowledge of some of it, if they were not in the room, they cannot truly and authentically understand what it is that you went through and see it in the pages of that book. They might read it, but they can't feel it like you can.
Yeah.
Only the people that have been through that. I go back to what I shared the other day. Even with my own sexual assault by somebody I consider to be a friend, unless you have been in that place, you can't truly relate to the fear that I experienced and went through in that place. Only if you've been there. And so I'm going to write from my lived, learned experiences to the person that has gone through that as well. Not the person that hasn't and sits there and says, I don't think that happened like that. That was probably her just making that up. He didn't do that. So you take away from your validity, your experience, your desire, you said, to be a help to someone else that has gone through that. So stand in your truth. I know we hear that a lot, but stand in your truth. It does not matter what the outside world or what that audience is going to think. They were not there. Nobody can explain it to you and the other victims better than you, because you did it and you've been there.
Well, Felicia, you have wrapped it up for us today. You have told us to don't be playing the blame game, and you told us we need to pause and process and use wisdom and discernment. That when we talk to our family, it's not going to be a PSA, and we need to be prepared for how they respond to us. We need to have our response readiness plan already in place. We need to consult legal about what we think we want to share that we might not legally need to share. We've talked about anchoring our message, our story in purpose and not in emotion. You've also talked about having that emotional aftercare plan for once it's been submitted and submitted to be published, and once readers have it, because everyone may not gravitate to it in a positive manner, and that we cannot allow external people opinions to determine who we are, or let me say it a different way, to validate our lives, our experiences. Because everyone has their own experience and everybody got their own opinion.
Right. And I just want to throw in there too, Teresa, again, just, don't allow others to define your story for you. You know why you're telling this story. So you define it. Don't let anyone else do that for you. Your story should be anchored in the purpose as to why you wrote it, not the emotions. So you define your story. Don't let anyone else do that for you.
Well, Felicia, I'm telling you, this has been another great episode. Releasing your story is not just about expression. It's about responsibility to your healing, to your relationships, and to how your story lives once it's no longer private. To our audience, if you're listening and realizing that writing your story is requiring more of you than you expected, you don't have to navigate that alone. Felicia works with writers through her Aspiring Writers and Writers Workshop, helping them to access their story in a way that is structured and it is supported. And once your story is on the page, I work with authors to refine and strengthen and elevate what they've written so it communicates clearly and powerfully. If you're ready to move forward with guidance, this is the work we do. So stay connected to the series, The Cost of Telling What You Survived. And until next time, before you go trying to take care of someone else, Please make sure you take care of yourself first. Bye now.